Welcome to Germany, Europe's largest economy and a pioneer in climate policy. From the industrial powerhouse of the 20th century to today's green energy leader, Germany's journey began in 1970s with anti-nuclear movement sparked by Cold War fears and environmental concerns. The term Energiewende, energy transition, was coined in 1980, challenging the belief that economic growth required increased energy consumption. By 1990, Germany passed world's first national feed-in tariff, and in 2000, the Renewable Energy Sources Act revolutionized global renewable energy policy. Today, we explore how Germany's climate policies are reshaping international trade, industrial competitiveness, and global economic patterns. This is the story of the world's most ambitious green economic experiment.
We're talking about a process that will take several decades. A structural change is occurring, a change that will also throw up major opportunities, namely for those who invest now in new energy-efficient technology.
Welcome to Trade Winds. I am Dakshita, and today we are examining how Germany's climate policies are affecting the international trade and competitiveness. With me are three experts Ankita, Shivam, and Khush. So let's begin. So, Ankita, let's start with Germany's foundational policies. What are the key historical developments in Germany?
Thank you, Dakshata. So, Germany's key climate change policies rest on three pillars, which were established between 1970 to 2000. So, first is the anti-nuclear movement, which created unprecedented social consensus, uniting conservatives, liberals, environmentalists around energy independence and safety concerns. Second is the feed-in tariffs, which was revolutionary. It guaranteed fixed prices for renewable energy producers, removing the investment risk. This was supercharged by the 2000 Renewable Energy Sources Act, which provided 20-year price guarantees and grid priority for renewables. Third was Germany's early participation in the Kyoto Protocol and EU emissions trading system, which established carbon pricing mechanisms that made emissions costly for industries.
So, what were the immediate impacts of these trade policies?
Initially, Germany faced the Porter hypothesis challenge, which was the environmental regulations imposed short term costs but drove innovation. German companies like Siemens and Enerco became global leaders in wind technology. By 2010, Germany was exporting renewable energy equipments worth 50 billion euros annually. However, energy intensive industries like steel and chemicals began experiencing competitive disadvantages. Energy costs rose significantly, leading to what the economists call industrial migration pressure. Companies considered relocating to countries with cheaper and dirtier energy.
So, these policies created both opportunities and challenges from the start.
Yes, exactly. Germany was essentially conducting a real world test of whether a developed economy could maintain industrial competitiveness while leading global decarbonization. The results shaped everything that followed.
So that was insightful. So now let's move ahead with the current policies. Shivam, what do you think are the today's game changers?
So, Dakshita, if we look at the current scenario, there are three major game changes, as you like to say, that is happening in Germany. The first one is the Climate Protection Act, which tries to achieve the net zero emission by 2045. So, what's interesting here is like EU is targeting to get net zero emission by 2050, but Germany is way ahead and it's trying to curb on the emissions 5 years earlier by 2045. This required Germany to invest additional 400 billion euros through 2030 just to achieve this target. The second one is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, which was launched in 2023. What it does, it attracts additional tariffs from countries who are not using proper mechanism for the production. So this is like the additional carbon tariffs for industries like steel, cement, and aluminium from countries which have a weaker climate policies. It also prevents carbon leakage along with protecting German industries which go through a strict emission restrictions. And third is the German Supply Chain Act, which requires all the top companies of Germany to follow the environmental as well as the human right standards throughout the global supply chain.
So, how do you think these policies are affecting the trade patterns?
The transformation is dramatic, I would say. Like for example, Germany for the first time in decades has become the importer of electricity. It is a strategic move as it is importing cheap renewable energy from countries like Denmark and nuclear energy from France. Meanwhile, the exports are also shifting from heavy industry to green technology. For example, I have the recent data here. The green tech sector now employs 3.4 million people in Germany, which is more than automotive sector, and exported around 132 billion worth of goods in 2023.
So, how do you think all these impact the developing countries?
The CBAM Act that I told earlier is like a trade dilemma for developing countries. Countries like India face an additional 15 to 20% tariff on imports like steel and cement, while countries like Vietnam are using the EU trade agreement that they had to align themselves with the European standards. In conclusion, Germany is trying to decarbonize the whole global supply chain, but here the fairness question arises. Are developing countries capable to keep up the pace with ever growing EU regulations?
So, that was an interesting conversation. So, now moving ahead, Khush, what do you think are the future prospects of this?
I think the scale is staggering, Dakshita. If we want to achieve the 2045 net zero carbon emission, we need a total investment of at least 5 trillion euros. And it's not just that. Even if we want to achieve the 2030 target, the emission reduction rate must triple from what it has been the historical average. This strategy is mainly set on two pillars. First is mass electrification, and second is green hydrogen. And the wider adoption of EVs has exemplified this issue. Currently, we have around 1.6 million, 1.65 million EVs. And by 2030, this number is set to rise to 15 to 16 trillion. And secondly, heavy industries like steel and chemicals have highly bet on the wider adoption of green hydrogen.
So, what does this mean for the investment flows and competitiveness?
You see, the short-term forecast suggests by 2026, Germany is going to face an economic stagnation. And because they have not yet completely absorbed the massive transition cost which has taken place. But one of the reports which was published by Big Four, they have suggested through a model that by 2038, there is going to be a turning point where the transition benefits are going to outweigh the transition cost. This is going to happen mainly by three ways. Newer industries are going to set up, people are going to reduce the climate damage, and energy independence is going to take place. And you see, the investment pattern has been shifting over the period of time at a very massive scale. We have been able to observe huge FDI inflows for the green energy sector. And as Shivam also mentioned, the traditional energy intensive industries have faced huge pressures because they either have to transform or they have to relocate.
So, how do you think all this will reshape the global trade?
Germany is pioneering what we call as the regulatory foreign policy. And this has happened through the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, or the supply chain laws and the green hydrogen requirements. And the countries wanting to trade with EU are constantly in the pressure to meet the German EU standards to follow the environmental criteria. So this has created a two-tier economy where you meet the EU German standards and have trade pacts with Europe, or you don't meet and then face tax barriers.
So, thank you, Khush. So, what I can understand from your economic analysis,
The Heckscher-Holland theory is key here. Traditional Germany was abundant in physical capital and skilled labor, exporting capital intensive goods like automobiles and machinery. But Germany's climate policy have deliberately altered its factor endowments, making fossil fuel energy artificially scarce while creating abundance in green knowledge capital through R&D investments and renewable energy expertise. Applying Heckscher-Holland theory, Germany's comparative advantage is shifting towards green technology exports like wind turbines, hydrogen systems, smart grids, while exporting energy-intensive goods. This explains why green tech exports have reached 132 billion euros in 2023. The technological gap model shows Germany's temporary advantages in green technologies that other countries haven't mastered yet. But as these technologies diffuse globally, Germany must continuously innovate, hence the 5 trillion euros investment commitment. Through the product cycle lens, Germany's green technologies are in the new product phase, high-tech, R&D intensive, produced in developed countries. As they mature, production may shift to lower cost nations, requiring Germany to stay ahead through innovation. Germany is capturing both static gains from trade, specializing where it has competitive advantage, and dynamic gains through learning effects and first mover advantages in growing green markets. Crucially, this represents strategic trade policy. Germany is using environmental regulations and policies like CBAM to create artificial comparative advantages, reshaping global demand in its favor.
So, in conclusion, the Germany's climate policies are not different from the trade policies. So, Germany is deliberately transforming from a traditional industrial economy to a green knowledge economy, betting that the environmental leadership will define the 21st century competitiveness. So, I would like to thank our experts Ankita, Shivam, and Khush for this insightful podcast session.
Thank you,
Thank you for
Dakshita.
inviting us.
So, that's all for Trade Wins. Thank you.